Live from our hurricane headquarters with real-time analysis from some of the nation's top meteorologists, this is Tracking the Tropics, powered by Bose Electric.
The earliest Category 4 hurricane on record, Hurricane Beryl, rewriting the history books, making an island landfall about an hour ago, continuing to trek west with cautiously optimistic eyes watching from right here in the United States. We have the latest track just in, plus an interactive Q&A coming up on this edition of Tracking the Tropics, powered by Bose Electric. Hello there and welcome into your Hurricane HQ, folks. JB here with Rebecca Barry, meteorologist here at the Max Defender 8 Weather Team. A lot to get to with a very active Tropics on July 1. Before we send things over to Rebecca, a reminder, we are here interactively to answer your questions. As Rebecca gives her forecast, we'll be looking in the Facebook Live comment section for your questions about Beryl and everything else Tropics related. You can use hashtag HeyRebecca or hashtag HeyJB, and we'll spotlight your questions and comments in just a moment. But first, Rebecca, a lot to talk about, but Beryl is the headliner. She's the main event.
Absolutely. And so Beryl was basically just an area that we were watching as we all left work on Friday. And over the weekend, it became the first Category 4 hurricane on record. And then blink and you may have missed it, we also had Tropical Storm Chris out there. And so just to give you a review, this is what's left of Chris. It was a very short-lived tropical storm. It was that area that we were watching that had about a 30% chance to develop. Well, they found signs of it just as it made its way on shore, and they named it Tropical Storm Chris. Now it's back down to a depression status. It's still just a rainmaker for Mexico and parts of southern Texas there a little bit earlier, although Texas is drying out from it at this point. And so flooding may be a concern, especially with some of the heavier areas of rain. You know, oftentimes with these weaker systems like Chris, or what's left over of Chris, see how the rain's not evenly distributed around that center of rotation. You just got very big areas of moisture. Sometimes they tend to stall out. They tend to stay over the same areas. And that's why we oftentimes see flooding a much higher concern with weaker systems than with stronger systems. Speaking of stronger systems, this is Category 4 Hurricane Beryl right now. And so passing those windward islands, it's going to make its way well to the south of Puerto Rico. And that's good news because it is still a very powerful storm. And so we're continuing to monitor it. What we're looking at right behind it, though, that's also got our eyes and our intrigue peaked. It's Invest 96L. And so these are two completely separate systems. This is Hurricane Beryl with 150 mile per hour sustained winds, flirting with becoming a Cat 5, but most likely peaking out at Cat 4 status. But we've also got this area of low pressure out behind it, basically moving over those same very warm, very deep waters with a 60% chance to develop. And right now it's not anything, it's just an open tropical wave. And so the designation for it is 96L. As far as Hurricane Beryl goes, going from a Category 3 to a Category 4 storm again this morning, those maximum winds around 150 miles per hour. And so it is moving to the west of that landfalling location with a minimum central pressure of 950 millibars. But one thing about Beryl, and I said it on Thursday and Friday when it wasn't even Beryl yet and we were watching it, it's screaming forward. That's a very fast motion at 20 miles per hour for a tropical system. And a lot of times when tropical systems are moving that fast instead of 6, 7, 8 miles per hour, it's harder for them to develop, but that is not the case with Beryl. Now, of course, those warmer waters and lack of wind shear have a lot to do with that as well, but it is still a very fast forward motion for a tropical system, and so it would be very hard to hold that type of intensity together with that fast of a forward motion, but it is moving over the exact path to get the least friction from land. Not going to get anything from the mountains of the Dominican Republic. Not going to get much from Jamaica. It's just on the edge of Jamaica. Not going to interact with those mountainous regions of Cuba. It doesn't really start to encounter any serious friction until it moves over the tip of Mexico here and into the Gulf. And as soon as it does that, it's not only battling shear from about tomorrow on. So after tomorrow, we'll start to see the intensity coming down. This is Wednesday at 8 a.m. back down to a Category 2. That has to do with a ton of wind shear. And so we knew that the system was going to be battling shear and most likely becoming weaker as it moved through that shear. But especially as it starts to interact with land and it gets back into the Gulf, it's just a tropical storm over the weekend. Another big rainmaker for Mexico, possibly southern Texas as well. And so when we talk about shear, we're talking about strong upper level winds. It basically cuts the top of the storm off or causes that vertical column of air that's keeping the system sustained to be either tilted or cut off. And so shear really decimates storms. Shear is our friend. And so we're seeing a lot of that shear. And the good news is we've got a lot of shear over some of the warmest waters in the ocean right now, are just to the south of Cuba, moving into the Bay of Campeche there. And so we need that shear to keep the storm from rapidly intensifying, because we know those warmer waters can act like gasoline on a storm, on a fire. And so right now we've changed the view. That was Beryl. Now we're looking at 96L, that second system right behind it. And a lot of people got a little nervous over the weekend, because once they designated 96L and they started running these forecast models on them, some of them did hint at the possibility of an interaction with Hispaniola, interaction with Cuba, possible interaction with Florida. But the same system is in place. We've got a ridge of high pressure across the southeast right now. Air goes clockwise around a high pressure, and that's basically keeping the Gulf out of play for these storms. And so we're seeing a very similar, if not identical, path for the next system right behind Beryl, which is great news for Florida. But for Texas and Mexico, man, that's a lot of rain, system after system. You got Chris right now, Beryl by the weekend, and then 96L. The timing on this looks a little bit later, about a week later, in fact, about 5 to 7 days later. And so this is the next system to watch, but early predictions are it is not going to be an issue for Florida because of that ridge of high pressure. And so eventually that ridge of high pressure could erode at some point this summer, but for right now we are really enjoying the benefits of that high pressure ridge keeping us a lot quieter. And people talk about, man, it's the earliest Category 4 storm we've ever seen. Well, look at the sea surface temperatures. We talked about how unprecedentedly warm the ocean is right now. It's more of closer to our peak summertime, August temperatures that we're seeing out there. And so it sort of does make sense why we would see the possibility for a more August-like pattern and more August-like formation zones. And so the good news is we have a lot of wind shear where the sea surface temperatures are peaking just to the south of Cuba here. And so even though it has the fuel, it has the shear to interrupt that development. And one good thing about systems like this is when they do move through, they do cool things down a little bit temporarily, but we'll take all the cooling that we can get, especially with as hot as it is this summer. Waves of tropical moisture, not much dry air out there. And so by Thursday at 5 o'clock, we're looking at that area of moisture moving onshore, and then the next one right behind it. Checking in on where we are for the season so far and what we can expect. It's hard to believe, but we've already been through 3 names. Really only Beryl is the one that we've been watching because Chris was so incredibly short-lived, and Alberto was also relatively weak and relatively short-lived as well. So Debbie, Ernesto, Francine, and Gordon are up next. It does look like this could be one of those seasons where we have to use that secondary list of names. But we have just started the month of July, so I wanted to show you where we typically see formation zones in July, keeping in mind that this is not a typical season, as we can already see from that Cat 4 storm. And so the Gulf is a hot spot, just off the Carolinas is a hot spot, but also the Windward Islands, a hot spot for July. Now, where we're seeing the storms form right now, it looks more like an August pattern, right? In the heart of the Atlantic where those sea surface temperatures are so hot. And so it does feel like an August, even a September storm pattern that we're in right now. And so we'll have to watch this season. You know, we've never seen sea surface temperatures this warm before. So of course things are going to be different. And so we may be kind of eternally suspended in the August-September pattern for this season just because of those warmer temperatures, or we could move on. We could see more tropical development like September, October, November earlier in the season as well. It's just going to have to be one of those wait and see things. Now, one factor that makes September's and October's patterns a little different is the migration of the Bermuda High, moving it north a little bit. And so the high pressure that typically sits over the Atlantic, of course, that air goes clockwise around a high pressure system. As it shifts northward throughout the season, the pattern for the storms and the curvature of them also shifts northward and takes the attention away from the Gulf, moves it more up the Atlantic. So we'll have to watch that high to see if the warmer sea surface temperatures have influenced it at all, maybe shifting north a little bit further, a little bit faster or slower, just depending on. It's just going to be one of those wait and see situations. This is our October pattern, and that's because we start to see cold fronts sweeping through. And so we'll have to see if we even get a typical October this year with those warmer zones. And then in November, not likely, but we do have a couple, and this is the November zones for you there. And so our average tropical activity is usually pretty quiet by this time of the year. And so here we are at the beginning of July. Only about 10% of the activity taking place from this point forward, ramping up as we head into that first week of September, especially. That's when we see tropical activity peaking. So we expect that pattern to also ring true despite those warmer than average sea surface temperatures. And I'll leave you with basically the seasonal forecast versus where we are right now. So far, we've had 3 named storms. Our average is 14. Colorado State calling for 23, so possibly 20 more named storms. And NOAA calling for that range of 17 to 25 named storms still. So if you subtract 3 from those numbers, that's basically what we have to look ahead to. Now, we have already seen a hurricane. We've already seen a major hurricane with Beryl. And so we're taking one away from those numbers as well, even though they're predicting well above average numbers for this season. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we're switching to that La Nina weather pattern and also those warmer than average sea surface temperatures. But it is interesting to see the shear that's set up across the Caribbean right now and how that's inhibiting that storm from staying as strong as it could as it nears Mexico in a landfall.
Lots more ahead on this edition of Tracking the Tropics with meteorologist Rebecca Barry. We're about to answer your questions out of the Facebook Live comment section. If you're watching on Facebook Live, hello into the stream center. Man, Caracao Island, I believe is the correct pronunciation. It's a small island in Grenada getting walloped by this storm right now, but we noted that is the first landfall event, likely because that there's going to be perhaps 1, maybe even 2 more landfall events with Beryl in the not too distant future as the storm continues to make its way westward. Let's get to some of the questions and comments that are coming in. How it works, folks. You use either hashtag HeyRebecca or hashtag HeyJB on Facebook Live, and then we can bring in your comments like this. Jonathan on the WFLA Facebook page, using hashtags for us both. Will Santiago DR feel any impacts from Hurricane Beryl? Now, if you're in the DR, if you are in the Caribbean, you're watching this one really closely, Rebecca. But as you noted in your forecast, you're feeling pretty good about things right now.
Yes, and I'm also feeling pretty good because that's our ex-producer Morgan's new husband. Did you notice the last name there?
Oh, wow. Okay, wow. Look at that. Some
Hey,
inside
Morgan.
baseball. That's pretty cool.
And I believe his nickname is JJ. And so we are looking at possibly increasing wind for you guys. I think you'll get slapped by a couple of outer rain bands. I think you'll see some higher than normal tides, even on the northern side of the island, just based on the fact that a very strong low pressure system is passing to the south of you. And so you'll have winds traveling towards that low pressure system. So I think it'll be breezy. I think you'll have high rip currents. And I do think you'll get some rain, but nothing like what the landfalling. I think you're kind of a nasty day, but not a dangerous day as the storm passes to the south of you.
So Morgan and JJ, I know you guys can't get WFLA over there in the DR, so you'll have to just keep it, right here on Tracking the Tropics for whenever we have storms. Speaking of which, you could have done a double take very easily, Rebecca, when you look at, the spaghetti models for 96L. Mm-hmm. I almost did a double take myself because the spaghetti models for 96L and Beryl, they are looking nearly identical right now.
Yeah, so this is the Beryl track, and then here's the spaghetti models for 96L.
That's crazy.
Almost identical.
Like coming down the same aisle at the grocery store.
Reason for that is we've got a big ridge of high pressure over northeastern Florida right now, and so that's high pressure. Air goes clockwise around the high pressure system, so that storm can't turn up into the high pressure because the air is traveling clockwise around it, and so it's steering that system into Mexico again, possibly into Texas. And so this is just going to be one of those wait and see situations to when that ridge starts to erode. But until it does start to erode, we could be pretty quiet in Florida.
That's, of course, good news for us and troublesome news for others elsewhere. That brings us again. We are here to answer your questions interactively. Hashtag HeyRebecca, hashtag HeyJB. If you use either of those hashtags, we can bring it up on screen like this. Kellen Bell on the WFLA Facebook page, hashtag HeyRebecca for you. Near Galveston, Texas here. Is Texas off the table? You noted during your forecast, Texas has seen a good amount of rain and is likely going to see a good amount of rain in the future.
Absolutely. And so what we keep in mind when we look at this forecast track and we talk about whether it's going to impact Texas or just Mexico is that cone out 7 days out there into Saturday and into Sunday is for the center of the system. And so if the center of the system were to take the northernmost part of that cone, absolutely Texas would be in play here. But notice how the cone tightens up the closer it gets to the point of origin. That's the accuracy of the cone tightening up as well. And so especially over the next 3 to 4 days, we'll get a much, much better idea of the eventual final landfall and potential impacts for that. But as of right now, Texas still has to watch.
And this is a good graphic. This shows that potential second and third landfall, because you're talking about landfall there on the Yucatan Peninsula and then potentially making a second landfall in Mexico. Let's go to the next question. It comes in from Kelly. See, I got Caracal and Cozumel a little bit confused there when I saw it at first. Kelly says, #KJB, I'm supposed to go to Cozumel this Saturday. Will Beryl be impacting that area, or will it be past the area by then? Cozumel, really popular vacation spot, cruise spot.
Yes, yeah. And if you are headed there on a cruise and with the timing lining up like that, they most likely will not take you to Cozumel. So cruise ships are experts at driving around these systems. And so you may end up having a day at sea, but they don't drop you off during a tropical system, I promise. And so if you look at the Cozumel location, that's a Friday morning as a Cat 1 over near Cozumel, and then back out into the Gulf by Saturday morning. So conditions will be improving during the day on Saturday, but not perfect. And so your cruise director will most likely, and your captain, if you are going on a cruise there, will most likely delay going to Cozumel until after this completely passes. Now, if you're flying to Cozumel or going another way, just know that it could be bumpy on Saturday morning as that system's exiting, but the conditions will get better all day long on Saturday.
A quick story. Hurricane Francis.
Yep.
I was in it on a cruise, and they basically just went to the northern Gulf and just went in a big circle as it passed. I believe either to our east or to our south, or maybe a combination of both. But it's something that the cruise industry, they know. They've done this before.
Experts at making sure you have as much fun as you can and trying to not get you sick.
We'll try to get to some more comments that are coming in here in just a second. Really quickly, Paula in our comment section want to know about the Grand Cayman Islands.
Yes. And so I do think they're going to feel the effect. I do not think that they will end up with a technical landfall, which is where the eye moves over it. But I think that they're, for all intents and purposes, they can expect to have those hurricane force winds, probably Category 2 at that point.
Let's see here. As far as the speed of this system, so we're looking here at it potentially being directly south of Cuba. I mean, really in the next 48 hours, right? I mean,
Thursday, yeah.
Speed is a good thing.
Absolutely, because you have to endure hurricane force conditions for a shorter period of time. It's a shorter duration of bad weather. And so speed also most of the time inhibits storms from strengthening or helps them fall apart a little bit. The fact that this storm is moving over such a friction-free environment with very few landfalls and it's so warm does mean that it's less of an effect as usual. Beryl certainly got enough power on its own and to sustain its strength as it powers on at this speed.
Yeah, max wind speeds of 150 miles an hour. Bobby Curtis Shehorn on the WFLA Facebook page, #KJB. Is Hurricane Beryl going to affect past Christian, Mississippi, and will it bring wind and rain? Look, let's just get this one out of the way. I'm not a meteorologist, but I know enough about the tropics to tell you, continental U.S., you don't really have to worry. Now, maybe the southern tip-ish, really South Texas, right, could see some, when this becomes, what would it be, tropical storm Beryl at that point, or maybe even TD?
I can't. I think tropical storm is likely. It is very warm where that is entering the Gulf, but it's the third system to pass over it, and so I can't imagine that there's that much energy left from it to allow it to get back up to hurricane strength before making that final landfall in most likely Mexico. But we don't have to worry about this in Mississippi. We don't have to worry about this in Louisiana. We don't have to really worry about this in Florida either.
How about St. Lucia? That's a honeymoon spot for me. I love St. Lucia, and it's. I believe that St. Lucia right now, it's. I don't think it's easy for us to pinpoint on our maps, but it's southeast of Puerto Rico. It's actually probably right now. I mean, it's
probably the worst of the weather for St. Lucia right now.
Yeah, because I'm looking here at the. Okay, so there's a landfall location. It's about, it's 2 islands up. Yeah, that orange above the 4, that's St. Lucia there, Rebecca.
Okay, I'll switch it over to the satellite views, which is current, and we can kind of see how big the storm is.
Yeah.
And it's certainly, they're experiencing Category 4 storm winds right now in St. Lucia.
Speaking of which, I should probably show some of the video that we got in earlier. This is from digital content producer Rachel Tucker pointing this out. This is Linpool 84. This is video coming in from Storyful. This is from Grenada. So really, I mean, the area... I believe this is from Grenada, and Rachel, you can correct me if I am wrong. But that's just a look at least, before the storm was at its worst, some of the impacts there. Look, we see video like this all the time coming in from, certain islands, in the path of the storm when you just see, it's probably way worse than this right now if you're in St. Lucia or Grenada or Barbados or any of the islands that are just really popular vacation destinations. But yeah, certainly worth pointing out that that right now it's a Category 4 storm walloping that chain of islands down there, Port Elizabeth as well. So,
and it's awful, but these islands do get hit more frequently than other areas, and so a lot of their infrastructure is built to withstand this.
Let's talk about the Bahamas. I think the Bahamas are mostly going to be,
Bahamas are marked safe.
Yeah, I mean, like not even fringe rain, right? I mean,
correct. It could be a little breezier, just because the low pressure system passing in such proximity. But I have a friend who gets really, really seasick, and she's leaving for a cruise in the Bahamas on Thursday. So I've already gotten to have this conversation a couple of times that the Bahamas are fine. You don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, and then of course, if the Bahamas are fine, you know that for people joining us from Puerto Rico, nothing to be concerned about.
Yes, and so this will pass far enough to the south of Puerto Rico. I do think the southern side of Puerto Rico could get slapped with a couple of outer rain bands, but I don't expect any hurricane force winds for you. I think higher rip currents, that sort of a thing.
Let's see here, reading through some of the comments. This is kind of a last call for all of your hashtag Hey Rebecca, hashtag Hey JB questions and comments. Were you just in Costa Rica?
No.
Or no. Somebody here, WFLA, was just in Costa Rica. Was it Jen Lee? Somebody was.
I don't know.
Or am I losing my mind?
I was in November. I mean, that's when the last time I've been. No. Oh, I did go to the strike mission where we went fishing. We went for 3 days.
At Costa Rica?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Remember that one? Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
forgot about it because it was such a short trip.
Elizabeth in our comment section, it's not loaded into our queue yet, but asking, what about Costa Rica?
Oh, and so Costa Rica did get remnants of rainfall from Alberto that broke off, because once it crosses into Mexico, those systems tend to just really devolve and fall apart. And so Nicaragua, Costa Rica could get some enhanced rainfall as a result, but they know about enhanced rainfall in Costa Rica. So I think they'll end up being fine. They actually had a drier rainy season than normal. A lot of the aquifers were down. They were having trouble because that giant lake in northern Costa Rica near the border of Nicaragua, the levels were so low they weren't able to generate their clean energy from some of the lake systems they have there. And so they were having rolling power blackouts because they're so dedicated to only using clean energy.
Yeah.
And so the rain was actually pretty welcome at that point across northern Costa Rica.
Wow. Let's talk about, a spot that actually could see an impact, and that's Jamaica. Now, if you're Jamaica right now, if you're joining us from Kingston, you're saying south, right?
Yes.
You want to push this thing as far south as possible, because right now Jamaica, or at least a portion of the island, I believe, is within the cone, correct?
Absolutely. And so I'll try to zoom in a little on the cone here for you so you can get a better idea of what we're talking about. And so remember, the cone is for the center. And so Jamaica can absolutely expect Category 2 storm force winds, especially on the southern portion of the island. The track will tighten up, but I don't expect, even as the track tightens up, if you were to get out of the edge of that track, to not expect Category 2 storm winds, because remember, the track is for the center. And we just saw how wide this storm was on the satellite view. And so I think Jamaica has to be prepared for a Category 2 hurricane, within, this is Wednesday night moving into Thursday morning. And so it will be very bad there for the overnight hours, especially. That fast forward motion will help, but we're still talking 105, 110 mile per hour winds for Jamaica, even though you might technically not end up with a landfall because the landfall is the eye. You should absolutely, for practicality purposes, expect a Category 2 hurricane in Jamaica Wednesday night moving into Thursday.
It's it's one of those systems where it's south, but not south enough for Jamaica's liking.
Yep.
So for all the folks in Jamaica, we're hoping that Beryl stays south, and I think everyone's rooting for it to stay south because you see, and I was paying attention to Rebecca's forecast. Wind shear has this now potentially downgrading to a Cat 2 down to a Cat 1 before it even slams into the Yucatan. That and hold it right there, Rebecca, on the satellite, because that brings me to the next one. Sarah said, thank you on Facebook Live, by the way. You're welcome, Sarah. Myri says, #Hey, Rebecca, what's the strength when it gets to Belize, and what could the storm surge there look like? So, Rebecca, coming back to the map, Belize right there to the south of that one symbol right there on the peninsula. And Belize is gonna, look, if you're Belize, you're saying go north. Either way, I mean, someone is gonna get hit by Hurricane Beryl.
And so this is where the wait and see game has to pan out a little bit, because if it were to take the center of the track, Belize wouldn't have to worry about storm surge because you're not on what we call the dirty side of the storm. The winds go counterclockwise around the low pressure, and so that would be blowing water away from Belize, but blowing water into Cancun into Mexico. But Belize would actually be on the clean side of the storm without storm surge. You'd still get winds, you'd still get rain, but it wouldn't be a storm surge issue. And storm surge is what kills people. Storm surge is what knocks buildings over. And so it will end up being a game of, are you to the north or are you to the south of the eye? If you're to the south of the eye, you will not have to worry about storm surge. If you're to the north of the eye, you will.
One or two more, and then we'll of course have to wrap up this episode. There could be some crazy news. I mean, look, locally news, some sports news in the Tampa Bay area that's coming into our newsroom that is creating some shock in our newsroom. But
Wait, preview? Yeah. Can we?
Well, it involves the Tampa Bay Lightning.
Oh no!
And there could be, and it's not great news.
Oh no!
So folks, on WFLA.com, we might have a sports update. I know it's off topic to what we're talking about, tracking the tropics, but here in Tampa, some potentially.
Well, the sports team is called the Lightning, so we can talk about it on the weather stream.
I guess that's the tie-in.
Is the free agency the problem?
Yeah, it is.
Oh.
Free agency is potentially something that could be massively pivotal for the entire franchise. But we'll get to that on the next live stream, folks. I think that we're organizing a live stream in some capacity after Tracking the Tropics is done. Really quickly, let's get the last call. We're going to get in as many of these comments as possible, as many of these questions as possible. Desiree wants to know, #KJB, is there any update on the system behind Beryl? Yes, Rebecca had the update on 96L when she was at the wall giving her forecast, but this is what the spaghettis look like, right?
Absolutely. So it has a 60% chance to develop, and there's no reason that we don't expect it to develop. It's moving over those same very warm waters with low shear. What you can take comfort in is that all the spaghetti forecast models for it now bring it over a nearly identical path. And so unfortunately the islands that just got hit will get hit again. And so we'll zoom in here on the potential landfalls, the potential first landfalls here along the islands. Not a big spread there. So there's a high confidence in that. It does look like it's going to flirt with Jamaica again. And so the only difference is the outermost forecast models, which are not accurate this far out. This will most likely change, do bring it a little north of Cancun instead of a little right into Cancun. And so we'll have to see how that plays out, because it's just too soon to tell, especially since the system hasn't actually formed yet. Spaghetti models get good 2 model runs after the center of rotation actually forms, and we're not there yet.
How about this one we'll go back to Beryl for Alan. #K Rebecca, is there a model showing it sitting in the Gulf to build pressure like Katrina did?
No, there isn't. All the forecast models keep it moving at a pretty fast forward speed. You know how it's moving at 20 miles per hour right now. And so something would have to happen, like a front would have to push through to stall it out. And it's just not the time of year for fronts, especially that far south.
Let's go to this one here from Emery. #KJB, what about Barbados?
Kind of on the edge there.
Yeah, I mean, are they? I'm trying to figure out like I mean, the worst of it's probably over in Barbados. No.
Yeah, I think the worst is over. You're on the cleaner side at this point. I don't think you're having a great day. I don't think anybody's getting a tan,
Right.
but I think the danger has passed.
Yeah, that's of course good news. And really quickly, want to pass along to Chelsea in our comment section. Chelsea, I see you. Yeah, we're not live on YouTube until we are in continuing coverage on Tracking the Tropics. We go live on YouTube when we are really monitoring a storm for potential impacts in the continental U.S. And so with this being just, Beryl is going to miss the United States, or at least when it hits maybe Texas, it's going to be significantly weaker at that stage, and it's going to be many, many days from now. So we're not in a high alert situation with this storm. With that said, it's wildly impressive. I don't know if impressive is really the right word. I'll give that more to
Interesting,
Rebecca.
yeah.
Maybe interesting is a better word. Interesting that we're talking here about a Category 4 hurricane on July 1st. I'll put you not on the spot, but I want to ask you, Rebecca, how ominous is this for the rest of the season, in your opinion? Is it an outlier? Is it just kind of like a coincidence, or does this mean that we have a season ahead that's going to be significantly consequential?
I think we knew this season was going to be busy. I think we also knew that a lot of the busy was going to be like what we had with Chris this morning. It was nothing, and then it was named, and now it's nothing again. And so I do think we're going to have a high number of those types of systems that form and fade pretty quickly. But these are the ones we have to watch out for, the Beryls. And if we didn't have that ridge of high pressure across the northeastern Florida area right now that's blocking the system from turning northward, I would be extremely worried about Beryl. I'd be extremely worried about the next one behind it. And what we have to think about is that ridge of high pressure can't last forever. And so at some point, if we do continue this conveyor belt of storms, the United States will be in play for these very powerful systems. So knowing that it was going to be busy and then watching it play out isn't necessarily surprising to me. And we also knew how warm the sea surface temperatures were. And so I'm also not that surprised that we're looking at more of an August-September formation zone pattern, because that's what the water temperatures are right now. They're typical of what we see in the peak of August and September, not June and July. And so when we're dealing with an unprecedented situation, I think we can expect unprecedented results. I'm hoping that this doesn't mean anything terrible. I'm hoping that possibly this conveyor belt of storms cools things off a little bit in the Atlantic. When a storm moves over waters, it brings up cooler waters from below. So it's not the solution, but I'm hoping it helps.
Well, clearly we've already had Alberto, of course, make its impact felt. Here comes Beryl bearing down to our south, and then the remnants of Chris, and then 96L with, I think, a relatively high formation chance over 7 days. So, look, folks, the 2024 hurricane season in the Atlantic is clearly underway, and we'll, of course, be paying very close attention to all the storms that are forming in the Atlantic here at WFLA with the Max Fender 18, the Tracking the Tropics team with meteorologist Rebecca Berry, our entire meteorologist team. Really appreciate you joining us for this edition of Tracking the Tropics. Our regularly scheduled episodes are on Tuesdays at 12:30 Eastern. This was a bit of a special episode that we did because so many people were talking about Beryl and a lot of questions that exist out there. If we didn't answer your question on this edition, join us tomorrow, 12:30 Eastern, 11:30 Central. I think it's the two of us again. I think we have a featured meteorologist joining us as well. And so we look forward to having a little bit of a better idea as to where Beryl is heading, if it's more north or more south. For Rebecca Berry, I'm JB Biunno. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next time on Tracking the Tropics.
Find Tracking the Tropics on these platforms. And for storm updates, the latest models, and helpful resources, visit trackingthetropics.tv.